how can I individuate, right? How can I integrate these shadow aspects of my personality so that I have a choice, that I don't like living by limitations and saying you can't do that or you can't do that, this or that. It's if I want to do something and it is required of the way of reaching my goals, I should be able to do it, regardless of how difficult or how challenging or how uncomfortable it makes me feel.
Hello, welcome again to Soul Sessions with Deborah Burnt Maldonado and Rob Maldonado. We are here with Creative Mind offering this wonderful podcast for you every week to go deeper into wonderful psychological topics. And today we are talking about Jung, Carl Jung, and his contribution to psychology. But before we begin this series, I would love for you to subscribe to our channel. Just click here on the button below here if you're watching us on YouTube. So, of course, we have to do a whole series on Jung because he's just such a big impact on our lives and the work that we do.
Yeah, so his contributions are many, and most of you, I venture to say that most of you speak Jungian already. If you've ever used the term introvert, extrovert, feeling complexes, thinking types.
Synchronicity.
Yes. A whole slew of vocabulary that has been kind of adopted by the culture that is Jungian. It's part of his work. So we figured we'd talk a little bit about his personality work, his work on personality and especially psychological types.
And it was one of his first contributions is the personality types. He wrote a book on personality types. And one of the main parts of it was introvert and extrovert. He came up with those terms. Yeah. And I think that it's so fascinating because I always didn't understand. I thought introverts were shy people and extroverts were people that weren't shy, but it's much deeper than that.
Yeah, so let's start with a couple of examples.
Okay.
Albert Einstein.
I would say he's an introvert.
Absolutely, right. Very much into analytical thinking, looking inward, meaning introspection. Very comfortable sitting for hours and hours with his own ideas and his own thoughts, his own imagination, not needing a lot of company or a lot of feedback from others.
They say that introverts are really you're really into your internal world, the worlds of thoughts, the way you're feeling, self-reflection, and that's where you get your energy from. You don't get your energy from the external world, more like your inner world is so rich, and you like maybe more solitary because you don't mind being alone because you get your energy internally. Who else is an introvert?
Well, let's look at just people contemporary to Einstein. Winston Churchill, British statesman who kind of got the UK through the World War II and their struggle against Nazis. Incredible leadership, very extroverted, right? In other words, he needs that attention. He needs that communication with his audience to really feel alive, invigorated. Very different than Einstein. And
more oriented toward external world, toward external people, events, things that are happening out in the world and wanting to lead others and, get through people and through action out in the world.
That's right.
More action oriented, would you say?
Definitely. And these are not, let's say, discrete categories that you can't do anything that's introverted if you're an extrovert or vice versa.
We're mostly both, aren't we?
Yeah, we're mostly a combination of both, but we tend to be more comfortable. And that's what Jung was getting at. We tend to be more comfortable, more oriented, it feels more natural to us to be one of or the other, depending on our predisposition, right? J.K. Rawlings, the author of Harry Potter, the famous Harry.
Yeah.
Did you ever read those books?
Never. And actually never watched. I think I tried to watch a Harry Potter movie. Yeah. I didn't have kids, so I think you get into it with children if you had kids, or if you're young and you read them as kids and you're an adult now. But yeah, I haven't read the books, but I love the concepts.
Yeah, but definitely an incredible story, right? Because I think she was a single mom, had some kids already, and wrote these in cafes and the kitchen table and just, out of her imagination.
And that's the introvert. The introvert
Yeah.
is a writer, usually, someone who's a philosopher. You have to have a rich inner world to create fiction.
Absolutely. There are writers that can be extrovert, like Hemingway. He's considered an extrovert. He was always into going out there and making things happen, right? He ran off to Spain while the Spanish Civil War was going on against the fascists. Those kind of activities, right? Very involved in world history.
Well, motivational speakers, a lot of times they write books, but they're not writing the books. They hire a ghostwriter to write their books because they're more extroverted. They need to be around. They don't have that like deep introspection. They're more like, hey, and they get their energy from being in front of a crowd, being on stage. And again, you can be both. I mean,
Yeah. What about Oprah? One of your favorites?
definitely an extrovert. Hello, everybody. She's very extroverted.
Yeah.
I'm sure she has her moments of introversion. She has her book club and she reads
Very
and she loves
thoughtful.
philosophy. Yeah, but her primary is the extrovert. And again, these aren't you're just one or the other. It just seems that you prefer one over the other.
Yeah.
Robin, I think you're an extrovert too, right? I mean, introvert, right? You're definitely not an extrovert.
Definitely not. But I enjoy being on camera and speaking and teaching. So there is kind of that shadow aspect to the introvert extrovert element too.
A lot of people think I'm such an extrovert, but I'm fine with just being unplugged and reading books and, not going to social events. And I'd rather just, have my inner world. And I'm a writer too. So it's like, that's something that came natural for me. And I think also too, my whole family is very extroverted. So I always felt like there was something weird, like I was like a weirdo, because I liked to sit alone and type and write stories and everyone else was external. So I think that's really interesting too, when we figure out what type we are, that primary type, to think about how we feel like maybe we were in maybe a group or a family group that didn't honor that.
One last one before we get into kind of the theory of personality. Mahatma Gandhi. So here we have somebody that's kind of both, right?
I would think he was an extrovert,
but he loved the Gita and he loved these silent retreats and spiritual retreats where, for days and days he would be in solitude, not speaking to others. So you see a combination of these things. I'd say overall introvert, right? But he was out there making things happen in society and very much involved in politics. So
would it be fair to say an introvert would love to spend a vacation, reading a book and writing and self-reflection and meditation, where an extrovert needs to have the party, the a lot of people around and, social activities and kind of being in action, more like maybe doing sports or something with other people. And so it's just, if you can answer that question, which is your favorite vacation, you kind of know what type you are.
Yeah.
And where did he come up with this idea? Like, what inspired the introvert extrovert?
Right. So in psychology, in general psychology, there's a whole section of psychological theory devoted to personality. So it's called personality psychology or personality theories. And people have contributed throughout the years, different psychologists have contributed to the field of personality psychology in important ways. And Jung was one of the first ones to really think about personality in this kind of holistic, the big picture way. His question was, is there a psychological orientation? Is there a kind of a way of perceiving the world, an attitude towards that relationship with others that defines an individual, right? And so he started experimenting and looking at different ideas. One of them is this thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition concept. These functions, he saw, these mental functions or these cognitive functions kind of are universal. We all have these. So if you combine them then with introversion and extroversion, you get about 8 different sets of personality types, right? Or psychological types.
And they're always also like a spectrum. So you could be leaning toward one or the other, but it doesn't mean you don't have the other.
Exactly. So Einstein, definitely thinking, right? It would be his what he leads with.
So using like cognition, would be the thinking, someone who's like thinking about things and through their thoughts.
Very analytical, very kind of
logical, maybe?
Logical. But again, like you say, it's a spectrum. Good scientists, like good artists, they depend on their intuition. They depend on their feeling as well as their sensing. That they go by hunches. They go by what feels right, or they often depend on dreams or meaningful coincidences, as Jung would say, synchronistic events. To give them their best ideas.
Like they would see something in like Einstein was the train going by, right? And the time made him come up with this, started thinking about this idea, but he had a feeling this is kind of weird and off. So I'd love for you and us to have a discussion of the difference between feeling and sensing, because a lot of times I'm sensing this or I'm feeling this. That word is often used in the same context. So.
Yeah, these words, of course, have very shaded meanings because people use them in very different ways. But, we're looking at Jung's work and the way his mind was. He was very disciplined in some regards. So if you think about sensing, the clue is right in the words, the senses. So sensing is about immediacy. It's about
the five senses.
The five senses and what you can feel, touch, experience in the moment.
See in the moment, which is really interesting, right?
Yeah.
That I see what's here, and I'm going to organize and orient my decisions based on the evidence of the senses.
That's right.
Make conclusions over the evidence of the senses. And so you can look at your life and how much of your life decisions are made by what I can see and not really thinking about anything maybe as intuitive. Like I need to see it first. Like I need to see it to believe it type of person, right?
That's right. And feeling, of course, you're talking about emotions, more of what is the sense of meaning that I ascribe to this situation, this experience, or the problem that I'm trying to solve.
And so having a feeling about something that you're not looking for as much as the senses, but how you feel about a situation can make you make a decision. Now, I think one thing too is that these are all ego. They're not really true potential. And so I see a lot of people make decisions from their feeling. And if something feels uncomfortable, they're like, ooh, my gut is telling me I shouldn't do this. And it's like, okay, but that's your ego. So I think we have to look at all these ways where we are by default making decisions and living our life and examining what's our default, but also know that these are all coming from the ego, except for maybe intuition.
Yeah, that's a good question. Now, let's finish up the four and then we can think about, the bigger picture, because Jung was very much into understanding not only the ego, but the true self. So intuition, from his point of view, from Carl Jung's point of view, was our apperception of the unconscious mind. In other words, it's always there. It's beneath the liminal experience that we're having, the awareness, the conscious awareness. It's the subliminal, right? It's the things we cannot see.
But are there,
and we can intuit, meaning we can, through our intuition, kind of get a sense that there's something there. I might not be able to describe it or really give words to it, but it's a knowing. It's a direct knowing of something that's true, or that we feel is true, or that we intuit is true, and that's our intuition. And it's very powerful. It's a very powerful experience when we have it, because it just gives us that certainty. I know this is true. I just know it.
It feels weird with intuition because it stands out from the thinking, feeling, sensing, all those ways of processing information or processing a decision about people, about what you're going to do with your life or what the next step is. Intuition, for me, always seems less logical, and it doesn't have logic. It may not even have a feeling attached to it. It's more like, where the gut feeling, it's not intuition. Intuition is like, this makes no sense at all. I'm looking at the senses, feeling my feelings, and I'm looking at my logic, and this makes no sense, but I feel like I need to do this. And so many times in my life, I'm sure you've had times where you made decisions that made completely no sense, and everyone else thinks that you're crazy too. Like, why are you doing that? But you just feel, I know this. And people that actually create Wright brothers who, had this idea that bird can fly, man can fly. Where did that come from? It came from their intuition. They had no sense of it. They had no feeling. It wasn't evidence of logic. They just felt this kind of other place. And I think it's where the divine enters in our life. Our higher selves are having us think beyond these kind of limited ways of processing the world.
Yes. I mean, they're all working at the same time, though. Like we can't really shut out our thinking, right? Because it's always operating. It's a function again of the mind.
Well, we know where we have to process what the intuition is telling us through thoughts and feelings and all those.
So they're all operating together, right? And this is an important point to make in developing theories. The theoretician always has to parcel out, what am I talking about? Like, I have to define what is thinking versus feeling. But it doesn't mean these factors are not interacting.
Like, you're not just, I'm a logical person, but you always have an element of feeling. You always have an element of sensing and that intuition. It's just one is predominant. Like one is your go-to that you make decisions from.
Yes.
But you're all, like, we ignore our intuition too, right? We have those kind of ideas, and then our logic comes in and says, nope. So that could be the case.
Yes. Yeah? So that's then where the environment comes in, right? So you have these predispositions that you're born with from your parents and great grandparents and so forth. But then the environment, meaning your family system, the school, the culture that you grow up in, the language that you learn, or the languages that you learn, all those have a bearing on how these predispositions are expressed. And voila, at the end, what do you get? The individual, meaning your particular personality is defined by the combination of your predispositions, genetic and epigenetic, and then the conditioning of the culture and the environment.
And so we're conditioned through genetics and as well as the environment.
Genetics
contribute to the...
Yeah, genetics would be a predisposition. In other words, you're born with it, and then it's expressed through...
But then it all culminates into your patterns.
Yes.
So, but I think the most important part of this whole idea of personality types is that it's the persona, and that's another term Jung came up with to talk about the mask that we wear. So we have this also this mask that we present ourselves. So we could be an introvert, but hide it by trying to compensate for it. Or we could be a certain way, but say you're really intuitive, but you can't share that because everyone thinks you're, woo-woo or something. And then it's not respected. And so it also be that you have predisposition to be really intuitive, but then the family system does not honor it, so you kind of forget it?
That's right. It would, in Jungian terms, it would go into the shadow, meaning you repress it into your personal unconscious, and you forget about it. You feel like, I don't have intuition, right? I don't feel that way.
Or you don't trust it.
Yeah, I don't express myself that way.
Also feelings, right? You could be more a feeling person, but if the family around you is more the thinking and logic, they'll be like, don't do that. And it's still a part of you, but you haven't expressed it.
That's right. So the bigger picture then, and this is an important point to understand Carl Jung's work, that many people, they just take one section of it and think, oh, I see what he's saying. But you have to look at it, the big picture, to understand his work, especially these kind of smaller components of his work. So the big picture for him was that we are not the persona. We're not this personality. It's an important aspect of who we are in the beginning, because we have to establish ourselves as social beings and develop a personality, a persona, a mask. But there's more to us. He says, there's a true self that is really the aim of human life.
So this is sort of our starting point. Our launching pad is our default personality. And I think the first step would be to face the shadow of the suppressed parts of our personality that we weren't allowed to, that were conditioned. They weren't conditioned out of us, but conditioned to be repressed. not on purpose. Like people don't like tell you have to stop being that way. Sometimes, but most of the time, it's innate. Like we implied in the family that we don't talk about those things, or we don't talk about ghosts or seeing spirits or having intuition or anything like that. Or maybe your family is very intuitive, and then there was no logic, so you didn't have a chance to like have that discernment. So you get into the magical thinking, and then it can be that opposite of that personality.
Yes, that's a good point. Not only that, you can think of it as the environment, the family, and the culture tell you what you should think about that function. So what is intuition? You might say, well, yeah, I have intuition. What does it mean for you, and how should you think about it? So that meaning comes from that environment. In other words, you're taught what it means, and then you believe it, right? Because the conditioning is a very powerful experience for us humans. It helps us fit in, it helps us survive, it helps us learn, but it also conditions us, meaning it limits us as to how far we're going to take our mind or how we're going to see our mind. So Jung then said, there's a way out of this conundrum. Yes, we are conditioned by our environment and we start to believe that's who we are. But he says through individuation, through introspection, we can free our mind from that conditioning. And then we decide, what do we do with these cognitive functions? In other words, we're free to decide for ourselves what these things mean for us and how we're going to use them.
And so we want to, we often talk about people starting a career based on that personality or what people expect. And then they end up at midlife saying, this is not the career I want. And so just to tell you that individuals that are introverted, they like deep reflection and solitary work, such as philosophy and writing. And so if you're an introvert, but then you're not rewarded for that, or you can't make money being a writer or whatever it is, you tend to push that aside and you have to like go out and be in the world, something that's more like acceptable in your culture and your society. And extroverts thrive with social interaction. So they make great leaders, they're great salespeople, they're in politics. And what I find interesting is that a lot of people that do kind of personal development and want to be coaches or want to be therapists, many a times they are introverts. They have to like go in, they love going inside. They love reading books. They love self-reflection. They love understanding philosophy. But then when it comes to being an entrepreneur, they have to like, now it's this other muscle. Like, how do I be an extrovert now? But because my default is that. And so we really, like Jung talked about, wanting balance. We want to be able to not feel like chained by our introversion or extroversion. We want to be able to use that, kind of know that's where our sweet spot is, but also how do we integrate the other part of ourselves?
Absolutely.
And that's individuation.
Yes, and individuation begins with shadow work, which is precisely kind of facing, if you're an introvert, what is the extroversion aspect of my personality? Because it's in there, it's simply in the unconscious, in the shadow, right? You pushed it away. You said, that's not who I am. That's not how I express myself. And that's not what I do. Therefore, your example of entrepreneurs in attempting to become successful entrepreneurs, they have to do their individuation, meaning they have to look at what is in my unconscious. What have I pushed away that is preventing me or limiting me from expressing my full potential.
And I don't think it's like bad, but I think we get so used to being in our way. This is just, I love, being internal. And so to be external, it just doesn't feel natural because we're just not used to it. But it doesn't mean that's not potential in us. And so with individuation, it's about what is the gift of extroversion? What can add to my life if I can integrate an extroverted aspect of my personality. And for me, it's like getting used to speaking in public and doing videos like this, that it would terrify me. 30 years ago, this would be like the scariest thing. But here I am. How about you, Rob? The same thing?
Pretty much. I've always pushed myself to do things that are uncomfortable, like public speaking and getting up on stage and things like that. But It's only after I started really looking at Jung's work in a personal sense, of asking myself, how can I individuate, right? How can I integrate these shadow aspects of my personality so that I have a choice, that I don't like living by limitations and saying you can't do that or you can't do that, this or that. It's if I want to do something and it is required of, let's say, as a way of reaching my goals, I should be able to do it, regardless of how difficult or how challenging or how uncomfortable it makes me feel. And that is part of the individuation process.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to sales, if you have your own practice, and it just feels so unnatural. Like I like to one-on-one and to be the caretaker and take care of people, and I don't want to be a slimy salesperson and have to pitch my work to people. It feels very uncomfortable, but you have to look at it beyond that judgment and say, what's the gift in that? What's the gift in being able to invite someone to come into your world for a transformation and to re-examine what that is so you can integrate it instead of just making those. I think with the ego, it likes to make things black and white and that's all bad or this is all good. And how do we have a more balanced personality?
That's right. And then as far as the functions of thinking, feeling, sensing, and intuition, then you're free to use any of those tools in your creative endeavors. So it's a powerful psychology that Jung lays out. But again, you have to look at the big picture to really understand what he was talking about and what he was aiming at.
Instead of just saying, oh, I'm an introvert, I'm going to take that little piece and I'm a thinking, feeling person and I understand that how I am and that's just the way it is and I'm going to cope with that. When I first started doing personal development, it's like you take that personality type and this is how you create your life around that, which is individuation is about breaking out of that shell. You're that plus so many other things. So very, very important. We are going to continue our series with the great works of Carl Jung. Those of you who know him well, this is just a good reminder for you. And then also those of you who are just finding out about his amazing work, you'll learn a lot in this series. Just want to thank you again for joining us. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel by clicking on the button here in the corner. Excited for this series, are you?
Absolutely. See you next time.
All right. Take care.